This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman
and Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod. All right, we've got some sponsors for the pod now.
Wait, what?
Every link you need for the things we talk about here is at artofdarkpod.com/sponsors. First up, books.
If you're into this podcast, odds are you're probably a reader. We've got links to buy new books from bookshop.org and used books from alibris.com.
And if you want to listen to your books, we recommend and use audible.com.
It's great, and the catalog is huge.
All right. So if you're listening to this, you are online.
Maybe you're very online.
You probably have a website or are thinking of starting one. Maybe you want a website like artofdarkpod.com. We built that with WordPress, which is by far the most popular way to create websites. And the single best host for serious WordPress is WP Engine. I've personally used them for over a decade now, and I don't host my websites anywhere else. Go to artofdarkpod.com/sponsors and click on the WP Engine link to learn more.
Finally, the best way to support the show is at patreon.com/artofdarkpod. Get the bonus After Dark content for every episode, access to the book club, and more.
Thanks for supporting Art of Darkness. And I don't think that was too painful. I think we did a pretty good job there.
Yeah, that sounded good.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
And welcome back to the Dark Room. I'm Brad Kelly, at Brad Kelly on Twitter. Kevin, this is Kevin. If you're on YouTube, you can see I'm pointing at him. And I'm probably not even pointing at him in the right direction, because I've noticed when I edit YouTube video that it doesn't look like it does on mine, but that's okay.
Yes, hello. It is very good to be here. Hello.
We are, for folks who may be new to the show, what a dark room is we have already covered a subject in depth in classic Art of Darkness style. And for the dark room, we bring in an expert, a biographer, a writer, a friend, sometimes all of these things at once, to kind of go dig a little deeper into that subject. Dark room, right? There's a metaphor there about developing all of that stuff. But so
wait.
Yeah.
Whoa, you're telling me this for the first time.
Yeah, Kevin,
we have core episodes, we have dark rooms, we have after darks for Patreon. The numbers are banging. We're having another good month. We're making our goal this month, Brad.
Yeah.
I love to see it. I'm gonna drive home this fact, this truth.
Yeah.
If you subscribe to the Patreon, you are helping to produce this show. You are contributing materially to give a couple of very busy middle-aged dudes slack to book great guests like our guest here, to prep. Brad's showing off his books. He's prepping the Mishima episode. I'm prepping the Beckett episode. Please consider supporting the best podcast about the dark side of creativity, Art of Darkness. If you have subscribed on Spotify or on YouTube or anywhere else, please, this is for you. Go to Patreon, patreon.com/artofdarkpod. Chuck $5 at us. If every subscriber did that, it's good game over. Lights out. Brad and I are basically.
Well, no, Kev, don't say lights out.
Well,
that means
this is the dark room, Brad. But truly, if Art of Darkness shows up in your feed through one of these channels, I strongly urge you to consider throwing in the material support. Whatever your economic circumstances, it's not that much money. You can find this in a couch. You can cut out one coffee a month. You can help the podcast and make this sustainable, because so many podcasts fade away into that good night. They go away. We don't want to go away. We want to continue. We want to be like that ex that you've blocked. You blocked them here. You blocked them there. But late at night sometimes you go back over those old DMs, those old DM-aroonies. and you remember that's what we want to. Wait, this is probably not a good way to pitch it.
Kevin, where are you going with this?
Basically, we give. Okay, rewind the tape. But you understand what I'm saying. Support the pod. We give you extra stuff. You want the extra stuff. We do After Dark episodes. If only for that reason. If you're an Art of Darkness ultra, if this has become part of your regular weekly, monthly listening cadence, if you are an Art of Darkness respecter, lay the money on the line. Help us out. We're growing. It's awesome to see. I love it.
Oh yeah,
wonderful. Okay,
and for new folks who are listening to this, if you just started subscribing, thank you so much. For people who've been hanging with us, of course, we love you. So
awesome.
All right, so we have with us today to talk about Emily Dickinson. We have the great Casey of the great Godward Podcast. Casey, thank you for joining us once again.
Friend of the pod.
Yeah,
it's such an honor once again. I can't believe I'm back. And man, like, what's better to talk about too on a Friday night than
Emily D? That's right. That's
yeah.
right. Yeah. For folks who don't know Casey, he's got a great show of his own out there, the Godward Podcast. We'll have a link to that. Definitely check that out. Cover some of the same topics, but also some very different ones. And Casey's got a great style. He also joined us in the dark room 2 previous occasions for Philip K. Dick episode and for a Kafka episode, 2 of my absolute favorite dark rooms. So I'm excited to get into this. Casey, let's kind of throw it to you first. Who or what is Emily Dickinson to you?
I used to teach American literature. Like, so the pantheon, like Melville and Poe and Hawthorne, Whitman and Dickinson really is like the core of this in the 19th century. And it's hard to say exactly like what brought me back into the 19th century when I was like a 20-year-old kid. It's hard to explain that. But for Dickinson in particular, I actually kind of made a vow to myself that I like her so much. I made a vow to myself that I would never write about her poetry because you can't, like, how, it seems, all you can do is damage it, I guess, in some sense. So in some ways, I'm kind of violating that oath coming on here because I know, like, whatever I'm going to say, it's just like not as good as reading Emily Dickinson. And that's the first thing I would say is like, just go read it. It's like, it's an experience to read those poems. And especially if you take the time to memorize a couple of them like you have, Brad.
Yeah.
Like, it's so rewarding just if you're into words and language and so on. But for me, I guess like the takeaway, Dickinson reminds me of some of those like 17th century metaphysical poets. I'm glad that you guys had done the Milton episode actually recently. Like, there's a lot of this kind of, it's like sort of English poetry where they're thinking, the whole, like, I guess since the Protestant Reformation, everybody's kind of lit up about God and taking a stand one way or another on theology. And this is one of the most like hyper literate civilizations ever in 17th century England, 18th century America, these places. And so you have the emergence of that. Like, I don't know if you guys ever read about Emanuel Swedenborg and the doctrine of correspondence and the idea that
Swedenborg he saw angels, didn't he? I mean, there are still Swedenborgians.
There are actually. There are. And the idea of the kind of like as above, so below stuff that's like, this is like, it's kind of cryptic, Newton alchemy stuff is happening. And in some ways, like there's one foot still in the Middle Ages and in like true out there kind of faith, and then on the other hand, I think Dickinson also would understand people like Kafka and PKD who have this experience of like the modern and the disenchanted world. And really, like, to me, what makes her just like so fun to read is that she's able to go, limitation and expansiveness, or subject and object, or self and other, or faith and doubt, eternity and the moment, like, and it's the spot in the middle of those oppositions that she seems to locate her poetry. And like it sends out shoots in kind of both directions. So you're thinking very metaphysically, but like you're in a garden in Amherst in the 19th century. And so this combination of being like hyper local and also in eternity, I just find there's no one who does it like her. I mean, she really is singular in her lifestyle, and of course it shows itself in her poetry, which became like her whole life, as you guys pointed out so well in the core episode.
No, that's beautifully put. That is something that's putting a very fine point, or very well articulated sort of summation of something I was kind of thinking about. Or there's this tremendous range, and when you say that about most writers, you're talking about, well, they can do a lot of sort of different I guess voices, for lack of a better term, a lot of different styles. It's not so much that she's doing a lot of different styles. It is, as you say, it's the microscopic and the macroscopic, and somehow to her they're the same thing. She does that absolutely. At times it's hard to, and for her context, her to me, really understanding her poetry, I suppose, part of the idea of this show is that you're always going to understand a piece of literature or a piece of art better if you understand the life of the person. But for Emily Dickinson, to me, it was really significant, this context that she was in, mid-19th century Amherst, the religious context, the historical context, what was expected of women at that time, what was expected in terms of literacy, or what was sort of promoted as literacy. I was so surprised how well educated, now we know of Amherst as sort of a college town, and we would expect maybe it's fairly well educated. I didn't realize until we went into it, it's this tiny little town, and everybody is hyper educated.
And it's like, I mean, it's so far from Boston in a 19th century context. I mean, it's isolated. It's not exactly the same kind of a place.
It's 100 miles or something like that.
But like that's, a day's journey or more. Like that's like a really long trip to make from there. And so and I think I looked it up today, Amherst had 3,000 citizens during her lifetime.
Right.
Think about that. That is so the opposite of, we have this sense now that like, if you're going to be a literature writer or, like a literary artist, you almost need to go to New York or like live in one of these cosmopolitan centers. This is almost like an argument for the bucolic, literary movement in some sense, just insofar as she is, isolated from like what's going on in Boston, for example. Not to say she hadn't heard of Emerson or even almost met him, as you guys mentioned in the episode, but there's like a culture in Amherst that's somewhat separate from the culture in Boston or Philadelphia or whatever. And we just don't. I mean, that's really hard to understand, I think, for us all these years later. Where a city of 40,000 people seems like a quaint little town.
Right.
But that was like the biggest city in the country in 1800, so the context is really interesting. But on the other hand, like you can read Dickinson, her best poetry coming in 1864 or something, and have no sense that the Civil War is raging.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it's like, so it feels like this could be written by Sappho or something. Like it could be written at any period. Some of these poems are just about like things in the world that are eternal, essentially, almost eternal anyway. So
that's one aspect of it that I find remarkable, is this sort of almost referencelessness of it. The way that it feels sort of suspended in glass that way, that it's and there's nothing wrong with the opposite of that, having a ton of, we just talked about we did Milton, and we covered Milton and we covered Dante, and their works are littered with historical references to the classics, and that's all makes it a rich brocade as you're reading it, and provides endless intellectual curiosity. And then Dickinson, on the other hand, if you have a passing familiarity with Christianity in the vaguest terms, that's pretty much all you need in terms of a conceptual toolkit to go into these poems, for sure.
Well, and a dictionary. Because I mean, that's part of it though, is that her, like I was very drawn to her like strained syntax even the first time I read her, I mean, it's so unusual, the phraseology. Like, you just would think I would never write it like that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a posture, right? Like, you read these, what is it, 1,800 poems or something, and it is they're all sort of in the same, like, you recognize an Emily poem right away. And so the voice is very consistent, but like that voice, this whole thing where she's reaching in both directions and she's in the garden and in, you know, eternity, I don't think it's not like a voice or a posture. It's really how she felt about the world. Like, she really was both in the world and not in the world, you know? And so it's like, it's as if the world view itself is almost the primarily interesting thing, at least to me. And then it just kind of like manifests in the writing almost effortlessly, you know?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, that's one of the kind of takeaways I had from doing the research in the core episode was she could have been doing, there was a searching process. I mean, there's a lot of people make distinction between sort of being oriented vertically and being oriented horizontally. Right. And she seemed to be deeply oriented vertically. Like, it's about immortality in the moment. And there's this sense that she is just going sort of deeper and deeper and deeper into the moment to pull stuff out.
Yeah.
And it could have come out in some other fashion if language wasn't her thing. You know, she just happens to be a poet. I'm dying to know, like, after doing that episode, one of my greatest, like, regrets or things that I'm never going to be able to hear or see is her improvising on the piano. I just have to imagine that would have been something. Maybe it wasn't, but I guess maybe I don't want to hear it. I want to imagine how wonderful that could have been.
Yeah. Well, there is certainly like an interesting musicality. I mean, you know, in the sense that like she's very intentional about when and where she'll drop a beat or like give you one of those half rhymes, or, I mean, it's like, you guys pointed all this out, but it feels, it's like the poetic equivalent of musical atonality or something like that. So it seems very modern in that sense to me. But also interestingly, you know, not so far gone that it's Walt Whitman, right? Like, it's not structureless. It's not blown out like entirely as far as form goes. You know, there are these pretty recognizable quartets or whatever you call them, and I mean, they look similar, the poems.
I'm going to jump in and read one of the poems.
Yeah, let's do that.
I was poking around, and this one I think will tie into another recent episode we did. Okay. This is called In a Library. A precious moldering pleasure 'tis to meet an antique book. In just the dress his century wore, a privilege, I think. His venerable hand to take, and warming in our own, a passage back or two to make to times when he was young. His quaint opinions to inspect, his knowledge to unfold, on what concerns our mutual mind, the literature of old. What interested scholars most, what competitions ran when Plato was a certainty and Sophocles a man, when Sappho was a living girl and Beatrice wore the gown that Dante deified. Facts centuries before, he traverses familiar as one would come to town and tell you all your dreams were true. He lived where dreams were sown. His presence is enchantment. You beg him not to go. Old volumes shake their vellum heads and tantalize just so. That is a book respecter poem.
Yeah, it definitely is.
What is that last? Give me that last bit with old vellum heads. What was that?
His presence is enchantment. You beg him not to go. Old volumes shake their vellum heads and tantalize just so.
Old volumes shake their vellum heads. That's I'm deeply envious of that sentence.
Yeah, but it does have that like kind of, you know, Presbyterian hymnal rhyme scheme to it, and you know, so yes, there is that there. I mean, actually, I always think that that's where the most interesting art happens, is where you kind of inherit the genre and the form, and then you fuck with it a little bit, like rather than just like throw it all out the window. there's these tweaks, or you're stretching it, or you kind of seeing where you can bend the rules. And she's definitely doing that on purpose. And I think probably that reflects some of her own sense about, things like social roles, expectations, and then like the self, not as opposed to those things, but as it's defined by and kind of constrained by and in friction with those things.
Right. And so there's a way in which her manipulating or experimenting or stretching, and this might be what you just said, and I'm just understanding it. There's a way in which her doing that to the form is in and of itself sort of commentary. I hate the word commentary. In and of itself is like a figurative of her doing that in life in some way, right? Like Emily Dickinson's life is an Emily Dickinson poem, sort of.
I think so, probably. Yeah. I mean, like, for example, the thing about the white clothes for the rest of her life, and her reputation for being, a hermit, the hermitess or whatever. Those are, they're like oddball things, but not like bad, right? Like those aren't sins. They're just blips. They're just like unusual, like sort of manifestations of character. And I think the poetry does the same kind of thing.
Yeah. This is a good time for me to pause real quick and tease the After Dark, because it kind of fits in with what we're saying.
How do they get the After Dark, Brad?
How do they get the After Dark at patreon.com/ArtDarkPod. Now, what we're going to do after we've got a lot more to talk about here with Casey in the main app. But when we come back, we will talk about Cotton Mather, who people may know, a little bit. We're going to talk about Cotton Mather, but one of the early pieces of criticism about Emily Dickinson, and maybe it's not even fair to call it criticism, it was an essay by a poet named Alan Tate in 1932, and he ended it with, Cotton Mather would have hanged her for a witch. And he was talking about Emily Dickinson. So we're going to look at in what ways was Emily Dickinson a witch? We're going to get kind of loose with the definition, obviously, but I'm not saying she was in there boiling newts. But why? In what ways might she have been a witch? Why would Cotton Mather have hung her? What does this all mean in the historical context of New England in the 19th century, and particularly before that? So it's spooky season, so I wanted to
do it. Get it? Patreon.com/ArtofDarkPod. We do a bonus After Dark every single episode. Those are a lot of fun. We cut loose. It's a good time. I just have to say, what's a guy named Cotton going around calling people witches? That's a name you don't hear very often anymore.
No, you don't.
You really don't. Can you imagine? You go into the restaurant and the busboy, his name is Cotton.
He had a brother named something like, this isn't it. He had a brother, maybe Casey might know it. He had a brother named like Productivity or something like that.
His dad's name was Increase Mather.
Increase. Okay,
that's Increase. Increase.
And his grandpa was actually John Cotton, one of those like first guys off the boats.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So like, I mean, we'll save that for the After Dark.
Yeah, we'll talk about it.
There is a lot to say about that.
It's kind of a meme, isn't it? Cotton. Now that's a name you don't hear very often anymore.
And I don't know if this cuts into that at all, but like the whole like religious question with Emily Dickinson is so fascinating. Like I know that there's like I'm very interested in the classics, in the ancient literature and that kind of history and stuff, and I know people are into World War II stuff, but like American literature and American literary history and American history back to the colonies is so interesting, and a lot of it is I don't know if it's lost or neglected or hard to track down, but there's so many interesting things happening. Like, so for example, Dickinson was basically born kind of in the middle of the Second Great Awakening. And again, in Amherst, she would have been kind of Congregationalist and Trinitarian and, essentially like the ancestor of Calvinist Puritanism in that sense, Whereas what's going on the coast with like Emerson and those guys is the beginning of a Unitarianism, which is going to become like transcendentalism. It's all like downstream of German higher criticism, and it's gonna become American liberalism or something like that.
A smorgasbord of heresies.
Yeah, exactly. we should have the like. I guess this is my best opportunity to be like the flag waving Protestant a little bit, because I think that and I try to give credit, like, you Catholics really do a good job with the architecture and the paintings and all that stuff, the incense. But like, you got to give credit to these Protestants in America for really having, and England for having, really sort of thrown down the gauntlet in terms of poetry, literature, and that kind of thing. And Dickinson is, like, right on the beat with, like, sort of what's going on in terms of, like literary thinking, I guess.
Oh yeah.
Which, is not a very well understood thing, but like, to me, it's fascinating that there are, we had, like, America has the Federalist Papers. You can all go read the Federalist Papers, and you can read your Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and stuff. And there were great essayists, and they're, excellent prose writers. But like, something happened in the beginning of the 19th century where many of the very best thinkers stopped doing that and started writing literature instead, poetry and fiction, for some reason. And I have my theories about the reason, which is that like, it gets to a point where it's very hard to say in prose what you want to say. So like, you have to tell it slant. I think you guys read that one in the core episode. And that becomes like an ars poetica. Like, you have to, in order to speak, you have to speak in parables. That's sort of the moment that I think happened in the middle of the 19th century.
Sure. And the big guy did that too. So it's not like we don't have.
Yeah, probably for very interesting, similar reasons. When you have like, the confluence of different cultures coming together, there's incipient nations happening, and, in that case, in the big guy's case, the clash between like monotheism and paganism and Rome and Judea and all those kinds of things. And so, it's like, this isn't necessarily, I'm not talking like about, Straussian speaking cryptically in order to avoid censorship, so much as in order to say it, you have to turn to analogy, because we don't have the language to like articulate what we would want to talk about in prose. So it's
it's impossible to imagine that poem I read in a library translated into prose. It would lose all of it. It literally has to be the thing. It's like a little gem. What would the prose equivalent of it be? Gosh, isn't an old book nice? It's like meeting somebody from a different time.
Right.
You just go,
okay.
It's just cliches.
And even where you read really good essays, somebody like Emerson, it's strewn with poetic language. Like so you feel him turn to poetry sometimes, even when he's trying to articulate some of these ideas.
They're probably not Art of Darkness listeners. Maybe they are, but I know there are I think largely fellas on the Bird website you'll come across periodically who will say, "Why are you reading fiction, bro?" like there's something wrong. Yeah, and look, I respect that if that's for you, do you? But listen, we've got a very strong case here that you should open your mind to poetry, fiction, etc. Yeah.
Well, I think like another way to sort of conceive of what she's doing and these other writers I mentioned are doing is that like this is the beginning of an empire. Like, and they probably kind of knew it, that like this is a young country. They're very consciously trying to be something that's not British, which may be a mistake, but like that's kind of what's happening. And so you have like an opportunity to define the myths, and that's like by the way what happened in Greece, like where Hesiod and Homer precede the philosophers. Plato is downstream from that stuff.
Oh, yes. Riddle me this, Casey. What writing happens at the end of Empire?
Like criticism, right? Like criticism and tweeting, probably.
Right, probably tweeting. Yeah.
Apropos nothing.
Yeah, a Twitter account that shall not be named that just says, "Why aren't we building stuff like this anymore?"
Right.
But, meanwhile, this guy never built a thing in his life.
80,000 followers.
So this is so interesting. I do like this sort of notion of conscious myth making, even if Emily wasn't perhaps deliberately participating in sort of the American myth making. There is something wonderful about that. So you do need your sort of founding documents, right? You need your Constitution and your laws, but like that stuff doesn't touch the human heart the way George Washington never told a lie, right?
Yeah.
Like, so, or something like along those lines, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think like I have my, journal. Like, do you guys or something? It's like, it's not really a journal. It's like a commonplace book. Like I'm just writing stuff up, and it's not like I think you're right. Like I don't think Emily Dickinson thought of herself as a representative speaker. That is to say, like she didn't really. Maybe I mean, it sounds like the Susan, what's her name, at the end of her life, almost knew that she would be read in the future. But yeah, I think she was mostly writing for herself. Like, which is to say, that's what we're doing here. Is like I write because I don't understand all this. It's weird, things aren't the same as when Shakespeare was around. And so you can kind of, again, inherit the forms, but if they don't, it's like my dad was like a professional. So he taught me to starch my collar and tie a tie real tight and tuck it into my khaki pants and stuff. Well, I don't love that. Like it doesn't feel like me. And I've done it before. I've like worn it to weddings, but I can't wait to get it off. And so like that, again, it's not to say never wear a tie again, but like,
sure.
The tension.
I'm announcing my run for the United States Senate because I cannot tolerate business casual anymore.
Yeah, it's terrible.
My job is killing. I need to ascend to a job where I can just wear my sweatpants. And I am kidding. I work from home. I wear whatever I want.
The life.
But I hear you. Yeah, no, you want to be yourself. And you said something just now, Casey, that I had been thinking a few minutes ago or at the beginning of the episode. It really feels like, looking at the poems again in the background here, like she was writing to please herself. And there's something, never lose, if you're a writer or you're a sued aspiring to be a writer, never lose that. Never lose that. Go on, Brett.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, I think, Casey, do you have a poem that you'd like to read or talk about? Yeah,
I do have one that's it's got 8 stanzas in it, so it's on the long side.
All right.
It's called "I Think I Was Enchanted." I guess that's the first line. And I'm just going to mention at the beginning here that she's going to mention in the third line the foreign lady, and the consensus here is that that's a reference to Elizabeth Barrett Browning, whose poetry she was much enamored with. And so I think that's so she's going to talk about sort of reading her poetry as a young girl. But what happened, I'm just trying to set this up because it's a longish narrative poem, but what she's going to describe here is like how that poem worked on her. And so, again, the experience of poetry and how it like both shocks and changes the consciousness and the self. Like these are such modern themes, right? Like this is happening in a time where psychology as a discipline didn't even exist. And that's where she's thinking, that's the direction of this. So okay. I think I was enchanted when first a somber girl, I read that foreign lady, the dark, felt beautiful. And whether it was noon at night or only heaven at noon, for very lunacy of light, I had not power to tell. The bees became as butterflies, the butterflies as swans, approached and spurned the narrow grass, and just the meanest tunes that nature murmured to herself to keep herself in cheer, I took for giants practicing Titanic opera. The days to mighty meters stepped, the homeliest adorned as if unto a jubilee 'twere suddenly confirmed. I could not have defined the change. Conversion of the mind, like sanctifying in the soul, is witnessed, not explained. 'Twas a divine insanity, the danger to be sane, should I again experience, 'tis antidote to turn to tomes of solid witchcraft. Magicians be asleep, but magic hath an element like deity to keep. Yeah.
Okay.
There's a lot in there. But
there is a lot in there.
The central idea is this idea of a change of the perception of reality brought on by reading, these poems that she's been reading, where, the bees become as butter, or, there's this swelling of everything, or the change in the scale of things, right? Like the day's step to mighty meters, for example. And she calls it conversion of the mind and compares it to the sanctifying of the soul. And this is like heavy duty Calvinist conversion, Protestant Puritan language that they all would have sort of, understood in those terms at the time. Just in case, I don't think you guys did go over this exactly on the episode, but like in order to join one of these churches in her period, you would have had to essentially like go up to the front of the church and give your personal conversion testimony. Wow. And it better be, authentic, earnest sound. I mean, often involve tears, those kinds of things. So that may be part of the reason Emily never could join one of these churches. I mean, if you think of her as a somewhat private person with an eccentric sense of self, the idea of going up in front of a church and kind of like exposing your soul is a really difficult thing to do. But the idea of conversion, sort of on the other hand, the actual conversion, is something she, of course, could have experienced. I mean, that's a private thing that happens to an individual, like inwardly, right? So this attempt to bridge that, like to take the inner experience and make it public, is something that I think people to this I struggle with. I think a lot of people struggle with, because you have these glimpses of revelation, of what would be prophecy if you could find the right words for it. But there's a gap between that, right? Like, I've sometimes wondered, who knows how many people experienced what the Apostle Paul experienced? It may be many, but he wrote it down in a way that we could hear it, right? And that's as much a part of the skill of, prophecy as having the experience itself is. So I detect in her writing that there are at least, my life closed twice before I died. Like there are a few references that make me think she had certain experiences of mind or soul or something that kept her searching in that direction, but that maybe the language of the church just wasn't comfortable for her, or something like that, which again, it resonates with me.
Yeah. And so, and then, she turned to, it's interesting that she refers to poetry sort of inculcating this conversion experience. She would tell people in her personal life, she would hint to people that she was writing poetry, and she would refer to it seemingly as either doing something naughty or something like following the golden thread. So both of those things. It's both something you're sort of not supposed to do, especially as a woman of that time, and also the golden thread. Somehow this is like I get the sense of like there is a way maybe of seeing Emily Dickinson that like she's writing to find the true words, that what am I trying to say? She's writing to, you have prophecies where people experience God speaking to them, and then here are the words that they said. Whereas maybe it's Emily is sort of tuning into something that, like she says, is witnessed, not explained. Right. And then her project is to try and not even explain it, but sort of outline it, show it shape somehow.
There's a line at the end of a poem that's about the Bible. I'll think of the first line in a minute, but she says, like, had but the truth a warbling teller, all the boys would come. That is to say, like, she actually almost says, if the Bible had been written better, like people would really be into it. You know what I mean? It's just like such a funny idea to me, but like also I guess such a Protestant idea in some way. So
right.
I have that poem if you want me to read it.
Go ahead.
The Bible is an antique volume written by fated men at the suggestion of holy specters, subjects Bethlehem, Eden the ancient homestead, Satan the brigadier, Judas the great defaulter, David the troubadour, sin a distinguished precipice, others must resist. Boys that believe are very lonesome. Other boys are lost. Had but the tale a warbling teller, all the boys would come. Orpheus's sermon captivated, it did not condemn.
Yeah.
Kind of almost like an indictment of the Bible.
Yeah,
pretty
it's
spicy.
It is interesting. I mean, and of course she like does, it's like some days she seems Christian, almost orthodoxly, and then like a lot of the time you can tell that she can't swallow that pill, But I used to use the beginning of that poem, those first 3 lines, to talk about the difference between denotation and connotation in like a phrase like the Bible is an antique volume written by faded men. It's like, what do those terms really mean there? It's those are really like loaded words, Is antique is both like old, maybe irrelevant, but also valuable. Like, so
right.
it kind of cuts both ways. And she's such a master of like using language to kind of go like that, both directions at once.
Yeah, and faded men might sound punitive or whatnot, but I don't think it is. I think they're indicting. She's indicting. Well, anyway, yeah.
Yeah, but faded men at the suggestion of holy specters, right? So it's like, the men are dead, but like what gave them the impetus to write, was sacred, was holy. Yeah. So really, it's like she's kind of zigzagging in her description of what the Bible is, which is interesting.
Well, and this is, I mean, I think too now.
Wait a minute. I was told that Jesus Christ himself penned the Gospels.
In English.
I gotta go back to catechism. I got got the whole thing upside down. Go on, Brett.
Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, this poem feels like a pinpoint we can put in this whole Congregationalist Amherst and the encroachment of this sort of more modern, and I don't mean that necessarily in a good or bad way, but the more modern transcendentalism, Unitarianism, because that feels a little Unitarian to some degree. It does, yeah.
I mean, I think like it's one of the most interesting research projects I ever failed at. Was trying to figure out like for example, the First Great Awakening happened essentially under the persuasion of Jonathan Edwards around 1737, and I mean it was huge. Like people were closing down shop; they were ready for the end. This thing spread all the way to England. It was a big deal, and everybody was Trinitarian. I mean, this is, by the way, only 45 years after the witch trials, which was, I mean, and we can talk about that maybe in the After Dark episode. But so from 1737, people are lit up for Jesus Christ. Trinitarians, I know they're not Catholics, but they're like, they're Calvinists, and they're trying to do a kind of Orthodox thing. And they would they would still exile people who were really off the map there. Well, that's like, what is that? 35 years before like guys like, Ben Franklin, I guess, namely, and Thomas Jefferson and Madison and Hamilton and all these guys, they're all deists by 1775. So it's like, well, what happened in there? How did that happen? And I think, it's hard. It is hard to track down. Part of it has to do with like the German influence starts to show up. There's an interesting movement around 1799 or 1803 or something at Harvard where they flipped from Trinitarian to Unitarian. Guys like Henry Ware and it would be William Ellery Channing eventually pick up this kind of Unitarian thread. And of course, it does become quickly associated with liberalism and probably the argument itself. That's the other part of this is like probably the theological argument itself was like a reflection of a political argument. I mean, that's even worth thinking about. So you have a guy like Thomas Paine, for example, who would write The Age of Reason. Like this is the Enlightenment, right? These guys, they're all like I mean, you've heard the story of Thomas Jefferson clipping out parts of the Bible, for example.
Right.
So like the
look at us now.
Yeah, well, exactly, right? But then then there is the reaction to it within 10 years or so. And that's where you get the birth of even eventually like things like Mormonism and Seventh-day Adventism and kind of pseudo, I don't want to call them cults necessarily, but like spin-off,
and even spiritualism and the variety of things that were going on in New York State. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Okay. This is a very interesting discussion. Explain to me this Unitarian idea in the period. I mean, we're getting into the weeds a little bit here, but I'm very curious about it. I mean, so obviously Trinitarians believe in the Trinitarian formula, and I assume the baptismal formula, which is Trinitarian. Unitarians, what do they just say God is all one single thing?
The Unitarians now are like, I've been to a Unitarian church before. They'll quote Buddha and Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it's out there. Wow. I think in the early 19th century, it was still Christian, or at least Christ oriented or something like that. But yeah, the best essay on this that I know of is Emerson's essay on the Lord. What's it called? The Lord's Supper, I think, something like that, where he gives an explanation for why he stopped serving up the Eucharist at church. And of course they kicked him out for it. They were like, we don't want a priest who won't give us the communion. But he had a whole set of reasons, and he had thought about it. And it's like very influenced by that kind of German like historical, the quest for the original Jesus. What's that book by? I think it's David Strauss, The Life of Jesus, or something, sometime around maybe 1810 or something. So there was, I think, but as I said, failed research project, because I can't find the moment where the shift from Trinitarian to Unitarian happens, like in an argument somewhere. You would think there would be like a debate or an essay that you could read or something like that. Right. What you can find is
just vibes. Yeah, just vibes.
Like an interesting historical fact. I know we're off the rails here a little.
No, this is good. Fascinating.
Yeah, but like you got Ben Franklin born in 1703 and Jonathan Edwards in 1706. So they're like contemporaries. But in 1728, according to his autobiography, Ben Franklin says he just decided to stop going to church because he didn't like the minister. So it's like you have to put yourself in that and go like, well, how could you do that? Like, that just is such a wild thing to do in 1728, but he got away with it, and he just became deist Ben Franklin, revolutionary, by the way. And that's like, again, that's like, I'm saying that these deists who were the revolutionaries were the Unitarians. Like, it's all kind of one set there. Okay. So it's at least very interesting to think about how the theology, the revolution in theology, either precedes or coincides with, or something like that, the political revolution. So the separation from England, the monarchy, all of that kind of stuff just gets thrown out the window for some reason in the shift from Trinitarianism to Unitarianism. Yeah. But it's hard to track it down. And again, like, I don't know, have you guys read some of the Federalist Papers or whatever? They were not exactly the clearest.
Been a long time. No.
It's lawyers.
Got my dog-eared copy here.
I don't know.
But I actually cut a shape of my handgun into it, so I can't read it anymore.
But I think but if nothing else, you can imagine that like Dickinson's family would have been all Trinitarian, essentially like derived from Puritans, and probably by 1830 or 1850, by the time she's 20 years old, she's getting wind of like Emerson's essays, which were published through the 1830s into the 1840s, for example. And so, as well connected as she is to the bigwigs that you were mentioning in the show, Brad, that she knew people coming and going from Boston. She was a big reader. I can't remember where I read this, but she read Emerson.
Yes.
So like there was a dialogue happening, in Amherst at the time.
Yeah. And she was her education. Her education had a heavy emphasis on science, and the natural science method. So not to say that is contradictory to any particular religious belief, but I think it would cause, it's another kind of touchstone that she's going to have. They get the Emerson people out here, and you got these weird, these advances in science, which to modernize don't really seem like it, but piecing these things together. And she's never sort of throwing out, she doesn't become like a Richard Dawkins atheist out of this process, right?
I don't think so, yeah.
She comes to understand that she's got to articulate what God is and what she is and what the relationship to them for herself. She's got to figure out a way to talk about this. And like you're right, going up and espousing the same story that everybody else did in front of the church to convince them that you're converted in some dramatic fashion just isn't probably going to make sense to her.
Yeah. Well, and of course, like there would have been like very hot converts of all stripes in the 1840s, 1850s. I mean, this is all, by the way, leading up to the Civil War, right? Like, which again, like the politics feels like it's kind of echoing some of these debates or discussions that are happening. And so like there's a certain type of personality who picks a team and, you know, waves the flag and is, you know, going down with that ship. But there are other people who kind of like want to observe what's happening and kind of have a harder time joining. And especially if you hear like a really interesting dialogue happening, it's not always clear. You know, I know, for example, Melville was one of these guys too, who kind of really struggled with faith and doubt. And it's like, well, I think he eventually joined a Unitarian church, like when he was 65 or something. But
oh, really?
Yeah, but like most of his life was in the waiting wing, you know, kind of like, I don't know, I'm not sure. And the dust really hadn't settled on this kind of peculiarly American theological political question. You know,
this is interesting. This makes me think like, okay, so
Brad, I'm on the Unitarian Wikipedia. I'm on the Unitarianism Wikipedia. I'm going to tell you something. I'm having none of this.
I'm sure.
I'm having none of this.
Do they have the rainbow? They always have like the rainbow flag version of their.
Oh no, I don't see that on the Wikipedia, but I do see that Frank Lloyd Wright was a Unitarian, which I'm a Frank Lloyd Wright
that
respecter.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, that tracks. Yeah, Brad, you were going to say something. You know what? I'm going to close this window.
Yeah, before you get all riled up. I just had this kind of passing thought that this notion that America is partially founded on the idea of religious freedom, right? No other country had been founded on that. With that sort of in its founding papers yet, I don't think. And it does make you wonder if that, and I personally think that's a good thing, but you have to wonder if that makes people go, I could, like, if it allows you or invites you
nothing's going to stop me now.
Right?
Right.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. That's why Kevin's having none of it. And it makes sense. That's the thing. Like, it makes sense when you have this. Like, I used to love teaching it because I didn't have to, you know, you just throw it to the students kind of. You go like, what do you guys think about this? But like when you question, it's like, I'm not sure which they question first, but when you question the authority of the King of England, why not question the authority of the priest bringing you the Eucharist also? You know, they kind of like, they reinforce each other. And so, and then it gets to be, also the people who wrote the Bible. Right. Yeah. I mean, they're just men. Yeah. So there's a great passage on that, by the way, in Thomas Paine's Age of Reason. I think it's chapter 7, where he like goes through that whole thing. He sounds like Richard Dawkins or something. He's talking about the Council of Nicaea and how they canonized the books. And you're like, these people were like this. They were like this close to being out and out atheists in the 1770s and 80s. And then it's so weird that like by the time you get to like 1840 or something, 1880, even like 1950, there is a real, I mean, I'm not even saying we think of, but like there really was Christian America. Like it made a comeback, you know, 2 or 3 times in these Great Awakenings after like almost shaving it down to the bone. Some version of Christianity seemed to kind of come, you know, make a comeback anyway. Yeah, very interesting. You have to wonder if that can happen again. Why couldn't it happen again? Yeah, I would. I mean, I think that's some people's hope is that some version of a awakening will happen. Sure. Let me. This is a good time for me to try and recite the poem that I have memorized. Okay. Because it sort of vaguely fits into all of this. Should I like beatbox poorly in the background? I'm not gonna. Go ahead. Oh my God. All right, you got this. I can't remember the first line. No, I'm just kidding. This world is not conclusion. A species stands beyond, invisible as music, but positive as sound. It beckons and it baffles. Philosophy don't know. And through a riddle at the end, even sagacity must go.
Oh no! Through a riddle, sagacity must go. To guess it, puzzles. To guess it, puzzle scholars. Oh boy, I totally dropped.
You want me to get it? I got it. I'll finish it for you. To guess it, puzzle scholars. To gain it, men have borne contempt of generations.
And crucifixion shown. Faith slips and laughs and rallies, blushes if any see. Plucks ad twig of evidence to ask a vain the way. Much gesture from the pulpit, strong hallelujahs roll.
Narcotics.
Yeah, that's right. Narcotics cannot still the tooth that nibbles at the soul.
That is a banger.
That's a great poem. Yeah, it's a great poem. And especially like those lines, faith slips and laughs and rallies. Yeah. The rhythm gets so weird in there. And of course it should, right? Like that's what she's talking about is faith, like kind of gripping and then losing the grip and so on. That was one of the things that really stood out to me. I like the sort of philosophical, I like the almost koan nature of it, that she's sort of pointing at this thing that's impossible to track down. But it was, I don't know if I've ever encountered somebody who was presenting the qualities of struggling with an idea or ideas and making them so physically felt. Like it feels like a little drama about trying to understand something and what you must go through and what people broadly have to go through.
It's so clever too, this one line, it asks a vein the way, and she, for certain she's playing on vein, the sort of doubling of course it's spelled differently, but a vein is almost like its own word. I'm going to read the whole thing because it was you did a fabulous job, and I just want to say
I stumbled on one phrase and then it threw me off completely. It's actually hard, but I've decided that I need to memorize a poem a month or so because I think this is a lost art. I think by not memorizing anything anymore, we are becoming. This is my great awakening. You have to memorize some stuff or you're going to just lose everything.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes.
I really like this. This could be a future Art of Darkness, like a challenge we might do at some point where, like, if anybody's listening and is so motivated and you want to make a recording of yourself having memorized a poem, we would love to see that. We would love to hear you do it. Go to the Telegram, t.me/Art of Dark Pod. You can leave a little audio note in there. Yeah. Casey, do you have any poems memorized?
Yeah, I'll try one. It's been a while, but I have one of my favorite Emily Dickinson poems called "This Consciousness That Is Aware." If you want to look it up, just so you can give me the backup in case I drop.
Okay, and then I'm gonna.
I've got it right here.
Okay,
and
Brad's
I also
want to
say, by the way, you know who loves why we should memorize stuff is children can really do this in like second, third, fourth, fifth grade. If you have kids. Like have them memorize like a John Donne poem, you'll be shocked. Like they can do it in 6 readings or something.
Right.
There really is a part of our brains that like has the capacity to memorize hundreds of poems if you just kind of keep exercising.
And this isn't a total Luddite position, but it is a little bit. We by sort of putting all of that cognitive activity off onto the internet. And I'll just look that up when I need it. I mean, I do it. I'm not saying I don't do it, but we are weakening that part of our brain.
If you're not memorizing it, you're not putting the poem in your soul the same way.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Yeah. So anyway,
let's hear it, and then go ahead.
This consciousness that is aware of neighbors and the sun will be the one aware of death, and that itself alone is traversing the interval experience between and most profound experiment appointed unto men. How adequate unto itself its properties shall be. Itself unto itself, and none shall make discovery. Adventure most unto itself, the soul condemned to be, attended by a single hound, its own identity.
Wow. I love that.
Well,
it's such a great poem.
It's a great poem.
It's like the thing is too about that is that the reason memorizing is so worth it is that it thanks you periodically for the rest of your life. Like you run into scenes or moments or objects that like a smell, like when you smell a magnolia tree and you're transported back to your childhood home. When I see like whatever, like a hound, it might be, this whole poem comes rushing into my mind and it kind of shapes the moment for me. You know what I mean? Or like the other famous one, I don't know if I have it memorized, but the one that's there's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons. And when you think about that poem and really like read the poem, like you will never see that slant of light again without, like, it's Emily's eyes that are looking out from your face when you've read that poem. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like at 3:40 p.m. Like between December and January. You know what I mean? It's like that long sunshine over the snow. It's just heartbreaking stuff, you know?
Oh, and you just saying that, I love that about seeing through Emily Dickinson's eyes, because there's something about reading about her life and her poetry that I was charmed by, and I don't know if I said this quite in the core episode. She had what she called her flood subject, and she mentioned it in many poems, which was immortality. She was concerned with immortality, just as so many people have been in one form or another. But there's this, I sense this smirk in her that she actually accomplished it and she knew it. That somewhere in these 1,800 poems, she said, I did it. I am now immortal in this way in which right now Casey and I are memorizing poems of hers and seeing through her eyes. She has lived, she has sort of lived forever in some sense. Yeah.
And probably she felt like, I mean, it's like when you really pray to the muse, I've heard, if you can get it down, like it's not even you really. It's like you're lucky enough to have channeled and now someone else will it's like this gift. I mean, you're almost just like participating in it.
Right. It's not an aggrandizement. She's not putting herself on a golden throne or something. It's like she's merged with everything somehow. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if we're going to be able to top any of that conversation, and we're about at the end of our hour. We're going to talk about witches. We're going to talk about in what ways can we think of Emily Dickinson as a witch, and what was witchcraft in American culture circa actually before Emily Dickinson's time. In Emily Dickinson's time, this was well after the famous witch trials, but just like anything in history, it doesn't really go away. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I think we've got a couple other things that we can also touch on. I wanted to talk a little bit about Saint Teresa de Avila. I'm not sure if I'm even saying that right. Kevin, am I saying that right?
Avila is what I've heard.
Avila. Okay.
Avila, I don't know. Teresa, I really don't know. Yeah.
We might talk about her a little bit in correspondence with Emily Dickinson, and then just kind of whatever else we've got.
I think it'd be Avila. Yeah, Avila.
Yeah,
anyway, yeah.
Casey,
thank you. That was fun.
So I always love having you on, man.
Are the Unitarians in the room with us right now? Who knows? Disavow. Who knows? If someone's a real honest to God Unitarian out there, I'd love to hear from you. I'm very curious. And nothing but respect for other opinions. Let me, however wrong, let me read this poem.
Okay.
The one that Brad did. And thank you so much again, Casey. Very good. We're going to have a lot of fun in the after dark. Get into the Telegram, t.me/artofdarkpod. Casey, man, I could hang out with you for just 2 hours and pick your brain about all that part of history and everything.
I'd
really
like to join you guys at the campfire one of these years.
Yeah. Let's do it.
Yeah. Right on. Okay. So let's close this out. I'm going to read it. The world is not conclusion. A species stands beyond, invisible as music, but positive as sound. It beckons and it baffles. Philosophy don't know. And through a riddle at the last, sagacity must go. To guess it puzzles scholars. To gain it, men have borne contempt of generations and crucifixion shown. Faith slips and laughs and rallies, blushes if any see, plucks at a twig of evidence and asks a vain the way. much gesture from the pulpit, strong hallelujahs roll. Narcotics cannot still the tooth that nibbles at the soul. That's a banger, Brad. That's a good one to memorize, man.
It is. Yeah.
All right, we'll be back. Patreon.com/ArtofDarkPod.